You think you know someone. You think you're building a life together, making plans, dreaming about the future. And then, in a single moment, everything changes. That's exactly what happened to me. 4.5 years with Wendy, stable, happy, or so I thought. I was sure she was the one. I even had the ring. But when I finally asked the question that was supposed to seal our future, her answer shattered everything. That was just the beginning. Because what came next? I never saw it coming. If you've ever trusted someone only to realize you might have been wrong, keep watching. You'll want to hear this. It's funny how life brings people together. One moment you're just attending another dull corporate event, and the next, you meet someone who turns your world upside down. That's how I met Wendy. She wasn't just charming. She had this way of making everyone feel like they were the most important person in the room. We exchanged numbers, and from that day on, we were inseparable. Our late-night conversations, the endless inside jokes, the feeling that we just got each other, it all felt effortless, like it was meant to be. But fate has a twisted sense of humor, doesn't it? 4.5 years. That's how long we built something I thought was unshakable. We traveled, we laughed, we supported each other through tough times. I could picture our future so clearly. Morning, coffees together. Lazy Sundays growing old side by side. I wasn't just in love, I was certain. Certain that she was my person, that we were each other's home. And in my mind, the next step was obvious. A ring, a promise, forever. But certainty can be dangerous. It blinds you to the signs, the subtle hesitations, the things left unsaid. Looking back, maybe I should have noticed the small shifts, the almost imperceptible pauses in our conversations whenever marriage came up. But I didn't. I was too caught up in the fairy tale, in the belief that we were on the same page. And so, with my heart racing, I planned the perfect moment. A candlelit dinner, the ring hidden in my pocket, rehearsing the words in my head. I had no doubt in my mind that she'd say yes. But life has a way of surprising you, and not always in the way you hope. 4 years and 6 months. That's how long Wendy and I had been together. Long enough to know each other's habits, quirks, and even the way our moods shifted with the seasons. We had a rhythm, a flow, an unspoken understanding that made everything feel easy. Friends would joke about how we were that couple, the ones who never fought, who always had each other's backs. And honestly, I believed it. I believed we had something rare, something built to last. We had talked about the future, about houses, kids, even silly things like what kind of dog we'd get. It felt like we were aligned. Or at least, that's what I thought. Marriage wasn't just an idea I pulled out of nowhere. It was something we had discussed, not once, not twice, but many times. I wasn't the type to rush into things, and Wendy wasn't either. But whenever the topic came up, she'd smile, nod, and say things like, "One day, yeah, definitely." I took that as a yes. Maybe I should have asked when that day would be. Maybe I should have noticed that her enthusiasm never matched mine, that her words were always just a little too vague. But I didn't. I was already picturing the wedding, the honeymoon, the rest of our lives. And so, I started planning the perfect proposal. I wanted it to be special, something she'd remember forever. I picked out a ring that I knew she'd love, one that suited her perfectly. I imagined the look on her face when I got down on one knee, the way she'd cover her mouth in surprise, the happy tears in her eyes. I knew she would say yes. I knew this was right. But certainty is a funny thing. It makes you blind to reality. And reality was about to hit me harder than I ever expected. The restaurant was perfect. Dim lighting, soft music playing in the background, the kind of atmosphere that made everything feel almost cinematic. I had rehearsed this moment in my head 100 times, picturing every possible reaction except the one I actually got. My heart pounded as I pulled out the ring, looking up at her with the kind of certainty I thought could never be shaken. "Wendy," I said, my voice steady, confident. "Will you marry me?" And then, silence. A pause just a little too long. A look in her eyes that I couldn't quite place. That's when I knew something was off. She didn't scream or cry. She didn't laugh or jump into my arms. She just stared at me, her lips parting slightly, then closing again like she was searching for the right words. I wasn't expecting this, she finally said, her voice soft, almost apologetic. My stomach tightened. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I love you, I do, but I don't know if I'm ready for this. Not yet. The words hit like a slap I never saw coming. Not ready? After 4.5 years? After all our conversations about the future? I forced a smile, nodding like it didn't sting, like my whole world wasn't tilting beneath me. She reached for my hand, squeezing it as if that would somehow make it better. I still see a future with us. I just need more time, she added, her voice gentle. But all I heard was doubt, and doubt is a poison. It seeps into your mind, making you question everything you thought was real. I slid the ring back into my pocket, suddenly aware of how heavy it felt. The air between us had changed, and deep down, I knew things would never be the same again. Something changed after that night. At first, I told myself it was nothing, that I was overthinking, but the truth was impossible to ignore. Conversations felt different, shorter, less effortless. There was a weight between us now, something unspoken, something neither of us wanted to fully acknowledge. Wendy tried to act like nothing had happened, like her rejection hadn't left a crack in the foundation we'd built. And maybe, for a while, I let myself believe it too. But cracks only grow when you ignore them. I started pulling away without meaning to, or maybe I did mean to, and I just didn't want to admit it. I answered texts a little later than usual. I stopped initiating plans as often. And when she held my hand, I noticed something I never had before. It felt like a habit, not a feeling. But she noticed. Of course she did. One night as we sat on the couch watching a movie, she suddenly turned to me. "You've been different," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Ever since that night. I wanted to tell her she was wrong. I wanted to say that everything was fine, but we both knew it wasn't. She tried harder after that. She'd surprise me with little things, my favorite coffee, a random text in the middle of the day, a tighter hug before bed. But love isn't a checklist, and effort can't erase doubt. I appreciated her trying, but the problem wasn't what she did or didn't do. It was that something fundamental had shifted between us. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Days passed, then weeks. The tension between us became something I carried everywhere, like a weight pressing on my chest. I told myself I needed time, that I wasn't going to force anything. But deep down, I was waiting for her to say something, to take back the uncertainty in her voice that night. And then, out of nowhere, she did. One evening, as we sat across from each other in the kitchen, Wendy took a deep breath and said, "I've been thinking a lot, and I'm ready now. I want to marry you." I should have felt relief, happiness, something. But all I felt was hesitation. A few weeks ago, I would have given anything to hear those words. But now they felt off, forced. Like she had spent all this time convincing herself rather than realizing what she truly wanted. I looked at her, searching for the excitement, the certainty I had once felt. But instead, I saw someone who was trying to fix something, someone who was afraid to lose rather than someone who was sure of what she wanted. And that changed everything. I let out a slow breath, my hands gripping the edge of the table. "I don't know if I'm ready anymore," I admitted, the words tasting foreign in my mouth. Wendy's face fell, her eyes widening slightly. "What? But this is what you wanted," and she was right. It was. But what I wanted didn't matter anymore, because something between us had already broken, and I wasn't sure if it could ever be fixed. Silence hung between us, thick and suffocating. Wendy stared at me, waiting for me to take it back, to tell her I was just confused. but I wasn't. And the more I searched for the right words, the more I realized there weren't any. "So, that's it?" she finally asked, her voice laced with something between anger and heartbreak. I wanted to say no, that this wasn't the end, that we could figure it out. But could we? Could we really pretend that things hadn't changed? Conversation escalated quickly. She was hurt. I was frustrated. Words came out sharper than intended. "You were the one who wasn't ready," I reminded her. "You told me to wait, and now that I have doubts, suddenly it's too much for you?" Wendy shook her head, letting out a bitter laugh. "This isn't about waiting, it's about you punishing me for hesitating." Maybe she was right. Maybe a part of me was punishing her, holding on to the pain of that night instead of letting it go. But emotions aren't always rational, and my heart didn't know how to unfeel what it had felt. She grabbed her keys, standing abruptly. "I need space," she muttered, her voice tight. I didn't stop her. I couldn't. And as the door shut behind her, something inside me cracked wide open. She was gone. For now, maybe. Or maybe for good. Either way, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had just crossed a line we couldn't come back from. The silence after Wendy left was almost comforting at first. No tension, no forced conversations, just space to breathe. She still texted me though. Casual check-ins, little reminders that she was still there. And maybe a part of me held on to that, thinking we just needed time. But time doesn't fix everything. And sometimes it reveals what you were never supposed to see. That revelation came in the form of Deborah, a mutual friend who hesitated before telling me something that made my stomach twist. "I thought you should know. Wendy's been spending a lot of time with someone from work." I laughed at first, not because it was funny, but because it felt absurd. "She can have friends," I shrugged, trying to ignore the tightness in my chest. But Deborah's expression didn't change. "I don't think it's just friendship," she said carefully. And just like that, the floor beneath me shifted. I didn't want to ask details. I didn't want to picture it. But my mind was already racing. Late replies, sudden changes in her schedule, the way she pulled away even before we fell apart. Had I been blind? Or had I just refused to see it? I sat there, Deborah watching me like she expected me to explode. But I didn't. I just nodded, exhaling slowly. "Thanks for telling me," I muttered, even though I wasn't sure if I really wanted to know. The weirdest part? It didn't even feel like betrayal. It just felt like confirmation. Confirmation that Wendy had already let go long before I had. Stared at my phone for what felt like hours, my thumb hovering over Wendy's name. I wasn't sure what I wanted to hear. An explanation, an apology, or maybe just something that would make this all make sense. But the truth was, I already knew. I just needed to say it out loud. When I finally called, she picked up on the first ring like she'd been expecting it. "Hey," she said, her voice careful. "Can we talk?" I let out a slow breath. "There's nothing left to talk about, Wendy." The silence on the other end told me she understood. Still, she tried. "It wasn't what you think," she rushed to say. "It didn't mean anything." I almost laughed. Not out of humor, but out of disbelief. "That's the problem, Wendy. It should have meant something to you." I wasn't angry anymore. Just tired. Tired of trying to hold on to something that had already slipped through my fingers. She sighed, and, for the first time I heard it, defeat. Maybe she had been fighting for us in her own way, just not in a way that I recognized. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. "But you did," I replied, my voice steady. And with that, it was over. No dramatic goodbye, no last-minute change of heart. Just the quiet understanding that we had reached the end of our story. After Wendy, I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't even sure if I believed in relationships the same way anymore. But life has a strange sense of humor. Because, in the middle of all that mess, Deborah was there. Not as a rebound, not as some grand romantic replacement, but just there. She listened without judgment, called me out when I was being too bitter, and somehow managed to make me laugh when I least expected it. And little by little, without either of us planning it, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. There was no big moment where we suddenly realized we had feelings for each other. It was just easy. A late-night conversation that lasted until sunrise. A touch that lingered a second longer than it should have. A look that said more than words ever could. I told myself it was nothing, that I wasn't ready, that I didn't want complications. But emotions don't wait for permission. And before I knew it, Deborah had become someone I wanted to be around, not just someone who happened to be there. Of course, word got back to Wendy. And if things between her and Deborah were already strained, this shattered whatever was left. Maybe I should have felt guilty. Maybe I should have worried about how it looked. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't focused on the past. I wasn't trying to fix something broken. I was just moving forward. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what I needed. They say time heals everything. I'm not sure if that's true, but it does change things. The anger fades, the sadness dulls, and in its place, you're left with memories. Some good, some bad, and some that still make you stop in your tracks wondering what if. What if Wendy had said yes the first time? What if I had been more patient? What if things had played out differently? But the thing about what ifs is that they don't change reality. And reality was clear. Wendy and I were never meant to make it to the finish line together. Even with Deborah, even with this unexpected connection that felt fresh and uncomplicated, there were still moments of hesitation. Not because I didn't care about her, but because trust, real trust, doesn't come easy after everything. I caught myself overthinking little things, second-guessing intentions, waiting for signs of history repeating itself. It wasn't fair to Deborah, and I knew that. But healing isn't a straight line. It's messy, unpredictable, full of moments where you feel like you're making progress, only to realize you still have wounds that haven't fully closed. Maybe that's what love is, though. Not perfection, not certainty, but choosing to try again, even when you're scared, even when you don't have all the answers. Wendy was my past, and Deborah, well, maybe she was part of my future. Or maybe she was just a reminder that moving on is possible. Either way, one thing was clear. I wasn't the same person I was before, and for the first time in a long time, I was okay with that.
Keep watching our stories by clicking on one of the videos that appear on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to be alerted about new videos. See you next time.